Stephen Hall. I'm a president of Leigh United. I'm also a delegate to Wigan Trades Council and former president of Leigh and Tilsley Trades Council. I've been involved in every struggle that you mentioned since Brunwick's in the 70s through the miners' strike. I was a former printer, I was at Wapping. And this is going to be the biggest campaign that I've ever been involved in my life, and it's certainly the most important, I would say. This idea of getting all these community groups, of establishing a network, is exactly the type of thing we've decided to do in Wigan after taking quite some time to get to that conclusion, as that needs to be done. But I say I've been involved in all these struggles in the past. One thing that I've learned from it is we've lost every single one of them. And right at the beginning, in terms of considering what we needed to do to fight these cuts, what is the reason for that? Well, there's obviously a whole number of reasons, but this idea that somehow the trade unions can fight on their own, in my opinion, is just an incorrect assessment. There's actually less of us now than there were when 35 years ago, and really one of the things that we early grasped on in our campaign is that we need to be forging an alliance, like it says in the TUC resolution, a broad alliance of communities, community organisations, the trade unions, and all sympathetic political parties should be involved in that. And I would say you've already grasped that. So really, in terms of other things that we've come to understand at Wigan, and one of those is, first of all, in terms of how do we tackle these arguments that have been coming out against us, is we need to nail this lie that for some reason we need to pay back this debt that we have currently right now, because we don't need to do that. And the reason we don't need to do that is for the same reason that the Attlee government in 1945 didn't pay off an even bigger debt then. It was actually 4 times as big then as it is now, and yet I don't think anybody in that Labour cabinet even contemplated making any cuts. What they did instead actually is they went to the newly formed World Bank, IMF, who were borrowing even more money and went into bigger debt, and that's what we should be doing now, because they used that money to do what we need to do now, and they used it then to build the council houses that many of us live in, such as myself, to build and set up the NHS, which we've now got, to establish the benefits system that we've got, pensions and so forth. And that's exactly the type of thing that we should be doing now, borrowing more money to invest in capital programmes which ultimately will pay for themselves. I went on a tour up in Dumfriesshire a few years ago. I went up on Loch Ken on the hydroelectricity dam that had built there in the 1930s. The tour guide said that this hydro plant has paid for itself 50 times over since it was built. Well, surely the council houses that we're going to build, they're going to, going to pay for themselves over time, and as a lot of other programmes. And that's exactly what we're doing, as I say, we should be building more council houses, ones that actually are not producing carbon, increasing their carbon footprint, using the money as well for insulation of our houses, so that all our housing stock, people will be able to save money on the gas, electricity bills. We should be using it to improve our public transport infrastructure, put in places like Leigh, just down the road for me, back on the rail network. And we also need to be using the money, this extra money that we should be borrowing, to develop things such as marine, wind, solar and other forms of renewable energy sources, and actually developing industries that might put Britain in a leading role in terms of those technologies and those industries. And in short, what we need to do is borrowing money, not cutting back, to reflate our economy and to put people back to work. And at the same time, fighting climate change, because climate change is something now, as far as this government is concerned, is very much on the back burner. And yet, it's a huge potential catastrophic blackcloth to these, what's actually happening. It's an even bigger problem that's taking place behind this government's doing nothing about. Well, we could be addressing the issues with climate change with some of the policies that I've suggested, making us one of the leading countries at that, and that's exactly what we should be doing. And if fighting against our own extinction isn't enough motivation, then what Nicholas Stern, who is a famous economist, used to work for the IMF and the World Bank, has said, he said, if we don't start to act on climate change now, it's going to cost us 20 times more in 10 years' time. Now, if I said to anybody here, if fighting against our own extinction isn't enough, it's going to cost you 29 times more, for example, fix your roof. In 10 years' time, most people would take out quite a big loan. I would suggest that I have interest than what I would be suggesting that we should be borrowing this money off, and we would be putting the roofs right. Instead, what we're doing is potentially running up bigger costs in the future, and all the things I've suggested, capital projects, should actually all pay for themselves. And if you think about it, it's going to cost us 20 times more to do it in 10 years' time, but save us 19 times the money doing it in 10 years' time, because at some point we need to address that issue. We also need to be nailing the lie as well that this deficit, the current annual deficit of 149 billion is projected to be this year, can only be plugged or primarily plugged by cuts. It's a lie, it's a definite lie. There are other alternatives, including, we could, you know, I mean, I'm not saying I'm against all cuts like some people, because I'm sure everybody in this room would agree with some cuts. For example, the £80 billion that we're going to waste over 20 years on Trident, a nuclear missile system that we can't use without the Yanks say so, and if we ever did, we'd all basically be putting an end to our existence on this planet. We should be using money that we're currently wasting on nuclear submarines and nuclear missile systems, and putting it, actually, a lot smaller proportion of it into places like Barrow, where they build the nuclear submarines now, and making it a centre for developing the type of wind, marine and other renewable energy technology that we need to be developing. We also, you know, I mean, this is one of my own suggestions, you know, I mean, we could renegotiate the debt that we've already got. You know, everybody must have done it. They run up a credit card debt and think, shit, how much interest am I paying on this? Let's take out a loan and pay it off at a lower rate of interest over a longer period of time. Currently, we are paying 4% on an international gilt rate for this money that we're borrowing. This is just short of £1 trillion that we're expected to owe by the end of this year, and what the government himself are predicting will go up to 1.36 trillion, even if everything they say pans out, as in we get all this growth in the private sector, which I'm suggesting nobody in this room believes is going to happen at all. So we could be saving up to £35 billion a year by borrowing money from the banks we own at the Bank of England's current minimum lending rate, which is 0.5%. You know, why are we borrowing money at 4% when we can borrow it 0.5% off the Bank of England and banks we already own? And also the PCS, I've handed out a leaflet before, as the PCS have explained, tax avoidance and evasion, and actually collecting the money that these people, rich people, have already been assessed for and haven't paid yet, alone as well, adding up, they estimate a region of £120 billion. So just adding those two figures together would plug the deficit, that's without the savings from Trident, and also without the savings we would get, which would suggest be billions, of putting people back to work instead of paying them not to work, paying them GSA and other benefits. And that's also without things like the Robin Hood tax that's been suggested, a tax on the transactions of the bankers and international speculators. That could potentially raise only a 0.01% tax on that, could raise up to 40 billion. We've also got other things such as, I mean, I remember at the Lib Dem demo, we had a Lib Dem guy who actually interviewed on the protest against the cuts, who said a land appreciation tax, places where I can fly, Wigan, you know, there's been a lot of developments in the town centre, the price of the land's gone up to none of our benefits. We should be taxing that appreciation in land value. That could bring in another 40 billion. And of course, that's without increasing corporation tax, which the Gondem government's just reduced. If it was only put back to what the EU average is from what it is now, that could bring in another 46 billion. And if I could carry on all evening, I could probably pay the entire debt off in 1 year just from these measures. So we need to be on the offensive about this, because we're being told there's no alternative to the cuts, and that's absolute, pardon the French, a load of bollocks. And we need to address that. The biggest insult, of course, is the 2.4 billion bank levy that the government are telling us the bank should pay back. That money doesn't even pay the interest on the money we borrowed to bail them out. Right, 850 billion. If you add that 850 billion to the cost of the impact of the banks collapsing in the first place, in terms of paying out more dole money and not getting as much tax in, almost accounts entirely for the national debt that we've currently got. And at 2.4 billion would take almost 400 years to pay off. Let's get things into perspective. These are the people who've got us into the mess that we're in currently, allegedly, and these are the people who should be made to pay, not us. The reason that they aren't is because exactly these forces are who the present government represents. The Tories have always represented big business and the bankers and all this, and all we've seen since the election is a party, the Lib Dems, who said they were a progressive alternative, show the true colours, which some of us always suspected, always known they've had, and betray some of their own supporters. I live in Bolton West, part of Wigan Borough. It's a marginal Labour constituency. The Lib Dem candidate in my constituency said, vote Lib Dem to keep the Tories out. And yet not only did she come a poor third to Labour candidate, her mates who did get in got into bed with the Tories and have decided to act together in their class interests and the rich people in this country to implement that programme. The only way we're going to stop these cuts ultimately is getting rid of that government, is building up a sufficient movement to do that. Now, one thing we should take out of the Lib Dems and Tories move is they've been able to set aside some of their differences to form this coalition. They'll still be fighting against each other at the May elections. They'll still be fighting each other at the general election. So I don't see what the problem is on our side of our parties who will still possibly be contesting elections, forming a coalition on our side, but not a coalition like they've got, which represents the banks and the wealthy, but a coalition that represents ordinary folk like ourselves here in this room, and that's going to fight and stand up for us. We're not at the level at the moment where we've got a mass movement, we've got to take stock where we are. We're very much at the early stages of this fight, and that's why I also suggest slogans like we had in Wigan on one of the placards on Saturday, which said, turn Wigan into Athens, general strike now is not quite at the level where we are. We really are at a much lower level of doing things like the brother over here suggested from the CWU, of getting our groups together, mapping out actually where all these community organisations are. I mean, we've got told in Wigan, 1,100 community organisations just in Wigan alone. That's probably a larger force than the trade unions already, who really have I must say, a different attitude to they have in Preston, where I would say Preston Trades Council's got it right. They're quite hostile to involve in the community because they want to be in charge. And that is not the way to go. Ordinary people and community groups won't accept some trades council deciding what's going to happen, and it's like take it or leave it. We need to be involved in all community groups. It needs to be a broad, pluralist movement that everybody feels part ownership from and contributing to the decisions that are being made, and that we're not following some trade union branch or some small left-wing group or whatever, and they're calling the shots. That's the type of movement we need, and we need to be, starting at a level of basically getting those people together, deciding what we should collectively come to together. There's lots of things that councillors can be doing. It's good that Michael's here and he's going to do what he said he is. We're going to pose these in the council chamber. Certainly if I was a councillor in Wigan, I would be doing that. But we've got to realise people, one of the things that's been lacking in this movement is leadership. And we're not, from what I can see, they're invisible. Some of the leaders of our movement, Labour Party and trade unions, are completely invisible. We've suggested things they can do in Wigan, which are within the law, which don't involve them like going out on a limb, even gestures you could say, and we can't even get them to do that. We can't even get them to pass a resolution to say they're against the cuts and to alert people what's happening. They're doing nothing currently, and we need to be putting pressure on all these people to say, this is not good enough. People are looking to you to provide a lead, and you're not doing so. And I would suggest the only thing that ultimately we can rely on are ourselves here at a grassroots level to be doing that. And I would like to applaud the organisation of this meeting tonight and getting things going in Preston, because I think this is going to go on for several years, and there's going to be casualties in terms of job losses, and that's inevitable. But one thing's for sure, if we don't fight, we'll lose. We can still fight and we might still lose, but it's only by fighting that we've got a chance of winning. And that's what we need to be doing, and we need to be united to do it.